Everyone knows that I am an item Thuron Blackwood bought at great expense. He made me grow my hair long and wear a white dress, all to mold me into his ideal image. I obediently complied, doing my best to meet all his demands. Everyone says Thuron has a good dog, and Thuron himself thinks so too. Isolde Whitlock is indeed very obedient and cooperative in bed. The only thing that bothers me is that she loves me too much. Everyone laughed, ignoring my presence, and began teasing me. I didn't hear what they were saying. I just stared blankly at Thuron's face, which looked so much like his, so much so that I almost believed my Alistair Blackwood was still alive. The family company collapsed overnight, and our family fell from grace, shattered beyond recognition. As a member of this family, I too was about to face a severe trial. That day, my father walked up to me with a solemn expression. His eyes were filled with helplessness and guilt, as if there was something he couldn't bring himself to say. He whispered, "Son, for the sake of the family, I must make some sacrifices. You need to find a boss to work for as part of our debt repayment." Hearing my father say this, I was shocked and overwhelmed with emotions I couldn't put into words. I knew that our family's honor and wealth were gone in an instant, leaving only heavy debts and endless suffering. But how could I just become a sacrifice for the family's debts? How could I accept such a fate? I felt a mix of resentment and helplessness. Just as I was about to be taken away, a handsome man suddenly appeared before me. He was dressed in a sharp suit, exuding confidence. When I saw him, I almost burst into tears. I widened my eyes, trying not to let the tears blur my vision. How could he look so much like him? How could there be such a face in this world? He walked toward me, studied me closely for a moment, then smiled and said, "My name is Thuron." His voice was deep and captivating, unlike his appearance. Her voice wasn't as crisp and pure as Alistair's, as beautiful as heavenly music. Something I could never hope to achieve. My Alistair was like the rain of Wushan, flowing into rivers and mountains, turning into clouds, and eventually becoming a tear in my heart. I stood there, dazed for a long time. I didn't know what he and my father were discussing. They seemed very familiar with each other. After exchanging pleasantries, he spoke to my father with a confident tone, saying, "I am willing to pay 80 million to keep your daughter." I heard this and was completely speechless. Unsure of how to react, my father agreed, and Thuron didn't give me any chance to resist. He simply took me away. In his home, my life was like that of a prisoner. He didn't make many demands of me, only saying simply, "Be my dog." So everyone knew I had been bought by Thuron for a hefty sum. In his world, I had no other choice. For the sake of my family and survival, I had to obey him. I began learning how to please him and how to navigate his circle. Thuron dressed me up to look like his first love, Serafina Davenport. I had to mimic her every move every day. Now, the person in the mirror wears a white dress, with long hair flowing down her shoulders. Her smile and demeanor identical to hers. In essence, I am her stand-in. The Thuron who appears gentle and refined to others transforms into a different person at night. His gaze becomes ruthless, and every touch brings pain, leaving marks that won't fade. I close my eyes, enduring his brutality, my mind a blank. After my parents divorced, my mother always urged me to find an opportunity to leave Thuron. Though I smiled and refused, she didn't know I couldn't escape. Thuron has a strong desire to control me. He sees me as a replacement for Serafina and would never let me go. And am I not also seeing him as a replacement for Alistair? Alistair, the name I can never forget in my heart. He was the only person I had ever deeply loved. His departure left me in immense pain, and my life suddenly lost all its luster. Since his death, I've been living each day like a zombie, numb and lifeless. Now, I've even found a glimpse of him in Thuron's face. Whether it's an illusion or a fleeting comfort, I just want to cling to any trace of him in this endless void. I desperately want to be near Alistair. Even if it's just for a moment, even if it's only a fleeting indulgence, I want to try embracing him. Lately, I've been keeping my head down and carefully fulfilling all his demands. And he seems quite satisfied with me. He threw me a lively birthday party and invited many friends and acquaintances. During the conversation, everyone was praising him for buying such a well-behaved toy. Thuron stood in the crowd, looking smug, and said, "Isolde, she's really well-behaved. Whether in public or in private, she knows exactly how to make me happy." After he finished speaking, laughter echoed around us, sounding somewhat jarring. I stood in the corner, quietly watching the commotion, feeling as though none of it had anything to do with me. I just stared at Thuron's face, which was so similar to the person in my mind that I almost thought Alistair was still alive. How could there be such a strong resemblance? Was there a reason for this? I suddenly felt a bit confused. Shen King had mentioned before that he had a half-brother from his father's previous marriage. As I was lost in thought, Thuron seemed to notice my gaze and turned to look at me, his eyes fixed on me. His eyes were the same deep brown as Alistair's. I pretended to be calm and didn't show anything, but he turned his head back. The contours of his profile were very similar to Alistair's, sharp and angular, as if they could pierce my heart. I couldn't help but want to get closer to this shadow, to tell him all the thoughts I'd been unable to suppress day and night. The story between Alistair and me was like a melody intertwined with sorrow and beauty, quietly flowing through the years. Destiny had bound us together, intertwining our lives and creating many unforgettable memories of youth. Alistair was born into a poor family, but she was diligent and did well in her studies. The only underprivileged student in her class and a role model for everyone. As for me, I was an introverted person who wasn't very good at talking, often sitting quietly in the corner of the classroom. Staring out the window, in the eyes of my classmates, I was a rather lonely person, but Alistair didn't see it that way. He never thought my quiet nature was a problem. Instead, he actively approached me and became my friend. He would take me to many places I had never been before. We would walk together on the country roads, holding hands under the cherry blossom trees, admiring the beautiful scenery. We would sit by the river, watching the water flow slowly by, sharing our innermost thoughts. I was captivated by his tenderness and gradually fell in love with him. He was my best friend and the boy I loved most. I will always remember our first handhold, our first trip together, our first kiss, and our first embrace. However, fate's twists and turns are always unexpected. On that sunny afternoon, an accident occurred, and Alistair suddenly left this world. At that time, we were walking home together when a reckless car suddenly careened toward us. In that instant, Alistair stood in front of me without hesitation, blocking the terrifying impact. I watched him fall before me, his clothes stained red with blood. Ambulances and police arrived, surrounding Alistair. After a while, someone lifted his body onto a stretcher and covered his face with a white sheet. My world suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Perhaps it was just a moment, but he was still gently holding my hand, and then he was suddenly engulfed by an endless sea of blood. I was completely unprepared, like stepping into thin air on a flat path, feeling everything disappear, falling into an abyss. At that moment, everything in my life collapsed and everything lost its meaning. Alistair, who had always been there to encourage and support me, was gone forever, leaving me alone to face endless emptiness. Nightmares followed one after another, and I couldn't cry or calm down because I hadn't yet recovered from this tragedy. Alistair's life was taken by a speeding car. The screeching brakes and splattering blood often echo in my ears when I wake up in the middle of the night, making it impossible to forget. I awoke from this terrifying dream, feeling as though I were being crushed by immense pain. I sat up abruptly, my body drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw a face that was both familiar and strange, a face that looked very similar, with deep eyes, a straight nose, and slightly parted lips, as if I had been transported back in time to see the boy I missed so much. I felt a bit dazed, and an indescribable emotion welled up inside me, causing me to run into Thuron's arms. His chest felt both strong and warm. However, he pushed me away, his eyes cold, as if looking at a stranger. "Don't cross the line," he said softly, his tone firm and refusing. I snapped back to reality, realizing I had brought the emotions from my dream into the real world. He was Thuron, not the Alistair I once knew. Alistair had left me forever, leaving me alone in this world to wander in solitude. I turned my body in his direction and fell asleep, feeling the entire world grow still. However, this tranquility didn't last long before Thuron quietly approached me again. I didn't like lying with my back to him because his voice was so different from my Alistair's. I silently rolled over and nestled back into his embrace, but the sense of loss in my heart couldn't be hidden. I gradually realized that I was doing this just to find an excuse, to seek temporary comfort, to fill the emptiness in my heart. Thuron's laughter echoed above my head as he whispered, "You're such a little dog who loves me." His tone was teasing, yet it also sounded innocent. I knew he didn't understand the struggles and pain in my heart. As the night grew deeper, I lay in Thuron's arms, my mind filled with thoughts. I recalled all the times I had spent with Alistair, those beautiful memories flashing through my mind like a slideshow. I knew I couldn't forget him, nor could I forget the happiness we had shared. But reality was cruel, and in the end, I could only lie in Thuron's arms, who treated me like a toy. Thuron grew kinder to me, making everyone envious. People around us were amazed by his attitude and whispered about whether I, the legendary lapdog, finally had a chance. He took me to upscale restaurants, gave me expensive gifts, and even, on a sunny afternoon, enthusiastically took me to a jewelry store to try on rings and then to a bridal shop to look at wedding dresses. Just as Thuron was about to pick out a wedding dress for me, Serafina, his first love, walked over. She pretended to congratulate me, saying, "Oh, I heard you're getting a promotion." "That's great, you must have such strong willpower." Her tone was a bit mocking, but Thuron laughed beside me. Just then, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression immediately turned serious. He answered the call, listened for a moment, then hurriedly told me he had an urgent matter to attend to and rushed out. Watching his departing figure, Serafina's best friend mocked me triumphantly. "Isolde, it looks like your good days are over." I smiled and said nothing. Lately, I hadn't been bothering with Thuron because I was fixated on uncovering the truth about the Blackwood family. I was growing increasingly suspicious that Thuron was the half-brother Alistair had mentioned, and even began to suspect that Alistair's death might be connected to the Blackwood family. Under the warm spring sunshine, Thuron's beloved Serafina finally returned. From that day onward, Thuron never returned to the place where we lived. That evening, I prepared a sumptuous and delicious dinner as usual, sitting alone at the dining table. I ate slowly, lost in thought. While eating, I pondered the similarities between Thuron and Alistair. I never expected their tastes to be so alike. However, people are different. If it were Alistair, he would have finished the entire meal with me. He loved the food I cooked, and every time he ate it, he would smile, revealing his two adorable little fangs, looking especially cute and innocent. We would enjoy the food together, chat about recent events, and share little details from our lives. We truly spent a warm and beautiful time together, but happiness always comes quickly and fades just as fast. Those past moments can only remain in my heart as memories. Alistair was like a butterfly, briefly resting in my hands before flying away. Alistair's story isn't over yet. He never mentioned whether he could fly freely with me if he became a butterfly. He also never said how the other butterfly would live in the darkness without him. All of this leaves behind endless sorrow and sadness. The moonlight is gentle, and I sit alone at the empty dining table, with dishes and utensils still piled up on it. My eyes are red, and my face is covered in tears. Missing him feels like a tidal wave, making it hard for me to calm down. Alistair's figure lingers in my mind, and thinking of him makes my heart ache as if it were being cut by a knife. Just then, footsteps sounded outside the door. I looked up and saw Thuron pushing the door open. A hint of surprise flashed in his eyes, followed by a teasing smile. "Oh, Miss Isolde, why are you crying? Is it because I wasn't home and you felt lonely?" he joked. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I knew he had misunderstood, but I didn't want to explain. "Thuron, you're back," I said softly. He walked over to me, bent down, and looked at me closely. His eyes betrayed a complex mix of emotions. As if he wanted to understand what I was thinking, he asked, "Are you crying because of me?" I didn't say anything. "Come on, stop crying. Pack your things and come stay at the villa with me for a few days." After he finished speaking, I was a bit stunned and didn't understand what he meant. But he had already turned and walked toward the door, leaving me standing there alone. I silently gathered the dishes, gradually coming to terms with the situation. His first love, Serafina, had returned, and this place needed to be vacated. I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. As expected, Thuron had never truly cared about me. I was just someone he could call upon at his whim. I obediently followed his instructions, quietly packed my belongings, and prepared to go to Thuron's villa. Before leaving, I asked Thuron to borrow his driver, Gideon Hawthorne. Gideon was a kind-hearted old man who always quietly prepared everything for me without saying much. Just as I was about to leave, Thuron suddenly transferred another million to me. Seeing the transfer notification on my phone, A complex mix of emotions welled up inside me. I carried my luggage and followed Gideon out the door. Suddenly, Serafina appeared. She was wearing a white long dress, her eyes gleaming with defiance and confidence. As if looking down on me, she walked up to me with a cold smile on her lips and said in a contemptuous tone, "You're Thuron's little girlfriend, aren't you? I hear you're very sensible. This time I've come back hoping you'll behave yourself and not cause any trouble." After hearing her words, I felt nothing inside. I glanced at her indifferently and said, "Serafina, you've misunderstood. I won't cause you any trouble. As for your relationship with Thuron, it's none of my business." Serafina seemed taken aback by my response. She paused for a moment before sneering, "HMPH? Don't think I don't know about your relationship, but I don't care. Thuron is mine, and no one can take him away from me." I didn't respond and turned to continue walking. I knew whatever she said had nothing to do with me. Lately, I've been focused on uncovering the Blackwood family's hidden secrets. Everything else is irrelevant. After Serafina left, I sat in the car, pretending tears were welling up in my eyes. Gideon noticed my expression, furrowed his brows with concern, and said, "Miss, please don't be too upset, Thuron. Some things simply can't be forced," I choked out. "Gideon, I just feel so hurt. Why is Thuron so obsessed with Serafina? Am I not good enough for her?" I asked Gideon in a more heartbroken tone. "Gideon, can you tell me more about Thuron's past? I want to understand him better." Gideon looked at me, his eyes filled with hesitation. I pretended to cry even harder. Gideon sighed, seemingly affected by my emotions, and began to tell me about Thuron's story. Thuron was actually a pitiful person. The old master had a carefree personality and never paid much attention to family matters. Thuron grew up lacking his father's love and always longed for his father's approval. I pretended to be surprised and interrupted him. "Really? Is that true? I always thought Thuron was a carefree rich kid." Gideon nodded and continued, "That's right. Thuron had a lot of pain deep inside. He had been searching for someone who could understand him." I gently stroked the ring Thuron had given me, and an idea began to form in my mind. Gideon spoke more and more, even mentioning that before Thuron was born, the Blackwood family had another child. After hearing Gideon's story, I was startled. Perhaps that was my Alistair. I became even more determined to uncover the Blackwood family's secret as soon as possible. Soon after, I discovered the truth. While organizing the villa, I accidentally came across Thuron's childhood photo album. The yellowed photos piqued my curiosity. I flipped through them one by one, hoping to find any clues about Alistair. Finally, in a group photo, I spotted Alistair's figure. He stood beside Thuron, smiling as brightly as the sun, and those sparkling eyes were instantly recognizable. Staring at the young boy in the photo, a wave of sadness washed over me, and tears blurred my vision. Sure enough, Alistair was Thuron's half-brother. Looking at the young boy in the photo, I felt deeply saddened. I gently touched the photo, feeling the traces of Alistair's existence. According to Gideon, I finally pieced together Alistair's true identity. He and Thuron were brothers with the same father, but different mothers. But as a child, he was driven out of the house by Thuron's mother. I couldn't imagine how much pain and suffering he had endured, yet he had grown up so outstandingly, despite everything. Appearing before me, unfortunately, he didn't live to see better days. He was sentenced to death by an unforgiving fate. His smile was warm, and his gaze was caring, making me feel as though he was right beside me, yet so distant. I closed my eyes, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, my heart aching as though it were being torn apart. Memories of Alistair flashed through my mind one by one. The happy times we spent together, the joyful laughter, and the sweet moments are now nothing but memories and regrets in my heart. Time truly cannot be reversed, and nothing can be undone. As night fell, I sat alone by the window in the quiet villa. The moonlight shone on me, but it couldn't dispel the gloom in my heart. That night, I cried again because of Alistair. Tears fell silently, wetting the photo in my hand. In the photo, he was smiling brightly, as if he were still in this world. Just then, Gideon walked in. He saw me crying and looked concerned. He thought I was crying because I missed Thuron, so he picked up the phone to call Thuron. My heart tightened, and I tried to stop him, but it was too late. Gideon is a good person. He only wanted to comfort me, but he didn't expect it to cause such a big problem. On the other end of the line was Thuron's voice, but it was Serafina who answered. She started accusing me, her voice loud and harsh. as if she wanted to tear me apart. She called me shameless and accused me of intentionally trying to attract Thuron. Soon after, Serafina stormed over to me, furious. Her eyes were filled with hostility and anger. As if she wanted to tear me apart, she thought I was trying to steal her Thuron. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. Her emotions grew more intense, and suddenly, she shoved me hard. I wasn't prepared, and my body lost its balance, sending me tumbling to the ground. I screamed out loud as my body arched through the air before crashing heavily onto the ground. In an instant, I felt an excruciating pain, as if something had been torn from my body. I lay on the ground, my clothes stained with blood. I tried to get up, but I found myself too weak to move. Serafina looked at me with a smug smile on her face. She turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the ground struggling. I stared at her back, filled with hatred. At that moment, Gideon rushed over anxiously. He picked me up and called my name frantically. Later, he took me to the hospital, where the doctors busily tended to my wounds. When I woke up, I realized I had miscarried. I stared blankly at the ceiling, fully aware that I had lost an innocent life, a child who should never have come into this world. This child was a complete accident. It was Thuron. He had once failed to take precautions and forced himself on me, subjecting me to unimaginable humiliation and pain. I never wanted to have his child. I only wanted Alistair in my life. Alistair, can you hear me? Can you feel any sympathy for me? I closed my eyes and poured out my heart to the darkness. In the cold, empty hospital corridor, Thuron walked into the ward alone, holding a cigarette between his fingers. The smoke drifted into the air. I sat quietly across from him, feeling nothing. He looked up at me with a hint of hope in his eyes. Before I could speak, he began. This time, Serafina was wrong. Can you forgive her? She just acted on impulse. We can always have another child. His words trembled slightly, as if he were trying to hide his inner turmoil with those words. I furrowed my brows slightly, looking at him, but my mind remained unchanged. I don't love him, and I never wanted his child. The loss of the child was, in a way, a relief to me. I shook my head gently and said softly, Thuron, you don't have to do this. He clearly hadn't expected me to be so calm, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. He stood up, walked over to me, and gripped my shoulders tightly, asking urgently, aren't you sad? How could I not be sad? I know I was wrong. I'll handle this properly. Believe me. I pulled his hands away, took a step back, and saw his anxious face, but I felt a surge of irritation inside. I was truly exhausted and tired of this endless entanglement. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. Thuron, you don't need to give me any more promises. If you really want to help me, just arrange a suitable job for me. I don't want to discuss anything else. He stood there, unsure of how to respond. Thuron finally relented, perhaps because he truly felt guilty. He didn't press me further and silently agreed to let me join his company. After that, Thuron left and I lay in the hospital bed, unable to stop thinking about Alistair. His gentle smile and everything about him had deeply moved me. My heart began to ache again. Serafina and Thuron were becoming more and more open about their relationship, and everyone was talking about how they were about to get engaged. That day, Thuron returned home unexpectedly. He stood before me, his eyes seeming to hold many unspoken words. Then he gently embraced me, his voice soft and low. If I marry Serafina, would you still be willing to stay with me? His words sounded like a test, yet also carried a hint of anticipation. I felt uneasy inside, almost to the point of vomiting, but I forced myself to smile. I looked up at his familiar yet unfamiliar face and tried to make my voice sound calm and sincere. Of course, I wish you a happy marriage. He paused, clearly taken aback by my response. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his tone tinged with self-pity. Actually, I still have some feelings for you. I smiled faintly, feeling a touch of disdain. Thuron and Serafina's engagement was drawing nearer, and I was intensifying my investigation into the Blackwood family's background. I acted cautiously, meticulously gathering information about the Blackwood family. Meanwhile, Serafina continued to send me provocative messages from time to time. Her words were sharp, like knives, aiming to pierce my emotional defenses. Unfortunately, I didn't care at all and completely ignored them. On a sunny afternoon, Thuron and Serafina's engagement banquet took place as planned. I wore a formal gown and entered the lavish banquet hall. Serafina deliberately had me sit at the first table, her eyes brimming with pride. She stood on the stage, her arm around Thuron's, their smiles as bright as the summer sun. Miss Isolde, you look stunning today. Serafina deliberately raised her voice so everyone present could hear. She pointed at me with a mocking smile and said, no matter how beautiful you think you are, you're just imitating others. At first, I didn't feel like arguing back. I just sat there quietly, letting her taunts hang in the air. Finally, I whispered, your real competition has never been me. My voice was soft, but she heard me clearly. She froze, clearly taken aback by my response. What did you say? She stared at me, her eyes wide. I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, I'm telling you, your competition has never been me. I don't even like Thuron. My words were like a bombshell, sending shockwaves through the ballroom. Serafina's face turned pale, and she looked utterly shocked. What are you talking about? Serafina asked, looking completely confused. I smiled and shook my head. I'm not making things up. I'm just a bystander. An outsider. I never loved Thuron. What happened between you and Thuron has nothing to do with me. Serafina fell silent, as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she only glared at me fiercely. Thuron stood there quietly, his face looking very grim. Then he turned into a wild beast out of control. His eyes bloodshot, staring at me intently, as if he wanted to devour me. You say you don't love me? His voice was low and trembling, each word seeming to come out with great effort. Time seemed to stand still in that moment, leaving only the two of us and the shocked, confused stares of those around us. I looked up at him and said clearly, yes, I really don't love you. In that instant, I saw the light in his eyes fade away, and the world around us grew dim. Thuron became enraged, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me violently. As if trying to snap me out of this reality, say it again. His voice was almost a shout, but I just stared at him coldly, showing no reaction, silently counting the seconds in my mind. Soon, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the tense silence. The police burst in, and their appearance left Thuron completely at a loss. Seeing this, I couldn't help but let a mocking smile curve my lips. He stood there, as if unable to believe what was happening before his eyes. I looked at him, feeling no sympathy at all. I whispered to him, you're no match for your brother. Every word felt like a needle piercing his heart. I saw his face turn pale, and the anger and resentment in his eyes turned into deep despair. The engagement party scene descended into chaos, with everyone rushing to leave the place before something worse happened. But I stood there quietly, waiting for the final outcome. Thuron finally snapped out of his shock and stormed toward me, gripping my shoulders tightly. His eyes were filled with rage, as if he wanted to tear me apart. What did you do? Why are the police here? I looked at him coldly, giving him a mocking smile. Do you really think all of this was achieved through your own efforts? No, you're mistaken. It was your mother who drove your brother away, and then had him killed, allowing you to keep your current position. Thuron's face turned pale. As if he couldn't believe the truth. He let go of my shoulders, took a few steps back, and shook his head. No, this can't be true. You must be lying to me. I saw the despair on his face and whispered, believe it or not, it's up to you, but your time is up. Just then, the police approached and said seriously to Thuron, Thuron, we've received a report alleging you're involved in commercial fraud and tax evasion. Please cooperate with our investigation. Thuron froze for a moment, turned to look at me, and asked with a look of resentment, you really don't care about me at all? I smiled slightly and didn't respond. For the Blackwood family, that day was truly a dark cloud. Thuron's mother was arrested for allegedly hiring someone to commit a crime, and the victim was none other than the man I deeply loved. Alistair. Thuron's company was also embroiled in tax evasion issues, and he himself ended up in prison. Once a prominent business elite, he had now fallen to such a state. His fiancée, Serafina, disappeared after learning of everything. Everyone around him was abandoning him, but I decided to visit him in prison. I wanted to understand his situation firsthand. Standing before the cold iron bars, I saw his weary and dejected expression. Finally, Thuron had experienced what it was like to be a prisoner in this dark and oppressive prison. Thuron's figure looked particularly lonely. Not long after being imprisoned, his eyes betrayed a sense of exhaustion, as if all hope and light had been drained away by the iron bars. As I was leaving, Thuron called out to me. There was one question on his mind, a question he desperately wanted an answer to, though it sounded foolish. I didn't give up. I just want to ask you, Isolde, have you never loved me? I stood before him, seeing his once bright eyes now dull and lifeless. I remained silent for a moment, shook my head, and whispered, "Never." Those 3 words felt like a heavy blow, striking Thuron's heart with brutal force. His eyes betrayed confusion and disappointment, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. He gripped the iron bars tightly, as if searching for strength, but all he felt was coldness and cruelty. I looked at him, feeling nothing. I knew that the person I'd always loved was Alistair. Alistair represented the best years of my life. He was irreplaceable. Thuron finally lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if enduring great pain. I turned away, leaving Thuron alone to face everything. The prison doors slowly closed, blocking Thuron's figure from view. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and felt the fresh air outside the window. At Alistair's grave, I gently placed a bouquet of white roses, his favorite flowers when he was alive. These flowers, like his life, were pure and flawless, white as snow, and emitted a faint fragrance, conveying my longing and sorrow for him. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle breeze caress my face, as if it were a kiss from him. I remembered his kisses, tender and lingering, as if they were melting me into his very essence. Now, this gentle breeze makes me feel his presence in this peaceful cemetery. I stand quietly before his grave, gazing at the tombstone engraved with his name. As I touch the cold surface of the tombstone, I pour out my heart to him, sharing my longing and pain. Though he is no longer here, I believe he has never truly left, but is still watching over me from somewhere in this world. After a while, I gently turn around, preparing to leave this place filled with memories and sorrow. As I am about to leave, I cannot help but glance back at the tombstone once more. In that moment, I seem to see Alistair's figure, smiling and waving at me, as if to tell me he is doing well and not to worry. He seemed to have dozed off, then opened his eyes, turned around and smiled at me. I looked up at the blue sky. A few white clouds drifted by, as if he were waiting for me in heaven. "Alistair, are you doing well in heaven? My love and blessings for you will never fade. I hope you find freedom."